Back in 2010, there was a reboot to the 1984 cult classic The Toxic Avenger announced. That's 15 years ago. The reboot in question is finally seeing the light of day with US distribution and is being released this weekend. And the question is, did I love this thing as much as the original, or does it need to be thrown out with the rest of the toxic waste in my house? Don't ask why I have so much of it laying around. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to The Garage. Gerald here with you. The Toxic Avenger. And like I said, it's going to be released in theaters this weekend in the US. It did premiere at film festivals a couple years ago, but then it went into what we refer to as development hell. Before we start with my review of the film and I let you guys know what I thought about it, I also want to tell everybody real quick about channel memberships. They are open, and for as little as a couple bucks a month, you can help me keep things going out here. I also recently, for all you horror fans that might be tuning in, started giving away a 4K digital code to one of my members. It's just a random drawing. Last month, I gave out a 4K code to Sinners, this bad boy right here. Shout out to my girl and channel member, Jules. And this month, for the month of August, you're going to get another horror code. Final Destination Bloodlines, a new one. I need to crack this thing open to see how the 4K transfer is, but one of my members will be receiving this. Every month I give away one to my members, and there's a bunch of other perks as well. If you're interested, just click join down below and you will forever be in my debt, especially if you happen to be a fan of award season. Make sure you check it out because I cover that pretty heavily here in The Garage. In looking at the timeline for this redeveloped reboot of The Toxic Avenger, of course, the original from Lloyd, Kaufman and Troma Studios was released in 1984. That film was a box office flop and virtually no one went to see it, but due to some midnight showings in the subsequent years, which were super popular back in the 80s and 90s, I wish they would bring those back, to be honest, and the VHS release of the film, it did gain a bit of a cult following, which it still holds today. So it spawned what would end up being 3 official sequels. In 1989, The Toxic Avenger Part 2. Also in 1989, because they were filmed at the same time, I'm pretty sure, was The Toxic Avenger Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie. Man, what a meta title for what was going on in movies at the time. And the final official spin-off, at least feature film-wise, was the Citizen Toxie, The Toxic Avenger 4, which came out in 2000. It did get several spin-offs as well. The Toxic Crusaders in 91 was like a kid-friendly animated show that I don't remember actually seeing back then, but I have seen clips of it since then. There was a stage musical in 2008, which was called just The Toxic Avenger the Musical. And there's been several toys, comic books, and video games with the character of Toxie or the story of the Toxic Avenger featured within. Back in 2010, it was initially released that there would be a reboot, and it was going to be a PG-13 family-friendly version of the film. Something that's interesting about that announcement is that Arnold Schwarzenegger was briefly attached to play Toxie in the original PG-13 reboot. After the announcement, nobody really wanted to have anything to do with the movie. The screenplay and the idea for the film, for the reboot, sat stagnant for basically 6 years. And then in 2016, they ordered a rewrite for the script, and Guillermo del Toro attached himself to the project as a producer, being a huge fan of the original film. A couple years later, in 2018, Legendary Pictures acquired the rights to the reboot. Troma founders Lloyd Kaufman and Michael Hers returned as producers after kind of being out of the picture with this whole PG-13 version. In 2019, we got a confirmed director with the rewrite from Lloyd Kaufman and team, and that was Macon Blair, who ended up being the director for this film that we're going to be reviewing today. A year later, in 2020, they cast the role of Toxie not with Schwarzenegger, but with someone much, much different, and that's Peter Dinklage, who was huge at the time on, of course, Game of Thrones, one of the most popular television series of all time. Not only did they get Dinklage, you also had Kevin Bacon and Elijah Wood signing on after production began, and they joined as the film's 2 kind of lead antagonists. And then we get our film festival run with the movie in 2023. It premiered at Fantastic Fest and Fantasia, like I mentioned before, as well as some other notable kind of local indie film festivals across the states. There was a famous line released during the screening of Fantasia Fest when rights to pick up the film were delayed for weeks that turned into months. One of the producers of the film said that the film was unreleasable, and that's why nobody wanted to put their hands on it, especially coming out of the COVID era. He just didn't think the film could be a theatrical release. Now, whether folks agreed with his statement or not, it definitely hurt because there were several more months that continued, and the movie just sat there, even with all these huge stars attached. But then in January of 2025, Cineverse dipped in and acquired the US and Canadian distribution rights. That leads us to, of course, the release, which is this week in August of 2025. One other note that I'm putting on the timeline here is that in July, just this past month, at Comic-Con, which of course is probably the largest comic book / entertainment convention in the world in San Diego, the Toxic Avenger reboot was featured in Hall H and had a panel with some of the stars and director of the Toxic Avenger, including Peter Dinklage and Taylor Page. The reason that's notable is because this is the first unrated horror movie to ever receive a main Hall H panel. It's usually held maybe larger horror films that are part of a franchise, and of course your superhero films and comic book adaptations, but never an unrated, really gory, violent horror film that we're going to be talking about tonight in The Toxic Avenger. So now that you know how daunting and difficult it was for the producers and the filmmakers, particularly the director, Macon Blair, who was very attached to this project for multiple years. The poor guy hasn't been able to focus on anything else for almost 4 years. Took forever. You got to ask yourself, why? Why did it take so long to get picked up and to be put into our cinemas here in the US and of course in Canada? Let's talk about it. A horrible toxic accident transforms downtrodden janitor Winston Goose into a new evolution of hero, the Toxic Avenger. He wields a glowing mop with superhuman strength, and he must race against time to save his son and stop a ruthless and power-hungry tyrant. This is not a movie that lends to spoilers, really. I'm going to stay away from any last act reveals or plot twists for certain characters. I won't get into that stuff. But if you're familiar with the Toxic Avenger, even the kind of the tone and vibes of the movie, then you're going to kind of know what you're getting into. And that's one of the positive things about this film for me, is that they kept the heart, I don't know if heart's the right word, but they kept that core essence of what the Toxic Avenger franchise kind of meant to me and how I remember it. It's very evident and present in this reboot. I find it interesting that this movie is coming out just a few weeks after the Naked Gun reboot. Now look, before you go, what the fuck is this guy talking about? I realize those are two completely different genres of film. But I love that those two movies are giving us a bit of a pattern in which the films are not trying to be anything more than what they are. The Toxic Avenger, this version, is literally just a stupid, silly, campy, schlocky creature feature that lends itself probably 70% to ridiculous comedy and 30% to heartfelt drama or even horror for that matter. And The Naked Gun, as I said in my review of that film, I'll tag it on this video for you, was probably even more so, 90% existed to just be slapsticky, stupid humor that did not have any message of any kind whatsoever, but just existed to literally make you laugh. Whereas this movie is doing the same thing. It's existing just to make you kind of cringe at the thematic elements in the film, but really it's just for you to have a good time, especially if you are the target demographic for this film, which why this review might be a little biased because truth to be told, I am. I love this shit. The original film I used to watch on VHS tape in the 80s and into the 90s when I was way too young to do so. And I used to think the nudity in that film and the gratuitous violence in that movie, that at 12 and 13 years old watching that, I thought I was so cool being able to see it. And this film knew that. It remembers that kind of lineage and pays homage to the exploitation horror film. And that's really what this is. It's almost as if this movie was made in the 80s and just got released. It's not trying to be really anything different than you would know from the original films if you're a fan of this franchise. The Naked Gun did this as well, but in the Toxic Avenger, there's a lot of backdrop or background comedy happening in the film. You have to really pay attention to what some of the extras are saying in the scene, or something that might be happening behind the main character that's talking in the scene. There might be some really silly thing going on behind them, or a poster on the wall that's really funny, but if you don't see it, you won't get the joke. That kind of stuff. I love that. It is so meta and so self-aware of what's going on, and it realizes how stupid it is. And again, if you're entertained by this kind of shit, you're going to eat this up. You're going to love it. You need to go into this film and realize I'm walking into a bloody, gory, gratuitous, violent, nudity, penis jokes, over the top kills and dismemberments, like toxic waste melting shit. And I mean, that is what you're going to get in this movie. Nothing more. Well, maybe a little bit more, but nothing less, okay? Let's talk about the performances real quick. Peter Dinklage, obviously in that lead role of Toxie, is much different than anything we've ever gotten, including in those subsequent sequels that I mentioned earlier in the 90s and up to 2000. Obviously, he is an actor with dwarfism, or a little person. I love him. I already mentioned his involvement in Game of Thrones. He is an incredible actor. Absolutely phenomenal. If you want to see a brilliant acting performance, look him up in a movie from 2021 called Serrano. I actually thought he was going to end up getting nominated for Academy Award that year. That's how good he was. And that was actually filmed the same year as this, which is kind of weird to think about now that I'm realizing how long it took for this movie to come out. But what's cool about his performance in this film is that he buys into what's happening. He gets it. He gets the joke. He gets the premise. He must have been a fan of the original film, or at least studied it before taking on this role, something. I haven't seen any interviews with him yet about this particular performance, and I wasn't at Comic-Con when he was there. But my guess is that he really took time to harness the overall aura of Toxie and did it flawlessly, because he brings enough nuance to the character of not only voicing Toxie, but of Winston, which is his human version before the transformation, and the kind of poignant emotional connection that he has to essentially his stepson in the film, portrayed by Jacob Tremblay. Now, again, this is a comedy, so I don't think the film really wants you to connect necessarily emotionally to that relationship. But I love that Peter Dinklage at least brings that into the fold. I mean, it's in play. It's one of the balls that's in the court. And it's possible because of the committed performance that we get from him, and really a lot of the other players in the movie, too. My favorite performance, aside from Dinklage, has to be Kevin Bacon, Elijah Wood, and Taylor Page. Now, when you're talking about Kevin Bacon and Elijah Wood, we are talking about the definition of hamming it up. Peter Dinklage's performance is subdued, down to earth, and he keeps that persona when he becomes Toxie, which also adds it as a little bit of a comedic performance as well, because you would think that kind of hideous transformation would turn him much more beastly, but he kind of keeps the same mild-mannered persona, which adds to the comedic level. But Kevin Bacon and Elijah Wood are just like, we are the silliest, stupidest, like twirling mustache villains that you'll ever see, not only in the way we look, but they also were committed to the performance, but in a much different way, where they didn't want to have any layers or nuance to their performance. They wanted to be these cartoonish comic book villain brought to life type characters, and they do that tremendously. Elijah Wood in this film, I'll throw up a couple stills for you. I said in my Letterboxd review initially that he looked like a hybrid of Danny DeVito's The Penguin mixed with the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I mean, it's a fucking weird look for Elijah Wood, but somehow, and I think he does this a lot actually as an actor, he harnesses it where you're like, oh, that's what he really looks like. Sorry, Elijah Wood. That's meant to be complimentary, I promise. And then Taylor Page, who I know recently from Zola, which was a great independent film back in 2020, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. She's been in a lot of things, and she's like an up-and-comer for sure, and she's really getting her name out there. I love how she brought a little more gravitas to the film, a little more of like seasoned kind of like performance and acting. She definitely delivered a human element to the cast that was kind of missing among the other big players, because obviously you have a radiation infected beast and these two cartoonish villains. So she seemed much more like what we could connect to as actual humans watching this movie. And then the last thing I want to praise is the prosthetics, the effects, the makeup. Brilliant. I mentioned to you earlier how one of the main reasons I love this movie is because it definitely feels like a movie of its time. And by its time, I mean the 80s. These types of films that were being mass produced and thrown onto VHS or whatever the case may be, there was like a million of them in the 80s and really going into the early to mid 90s. And this film wanted to be that. And it was able to do that because it didn't really do anything modern with the filmmaking. Now there is some like CGI when it comes to like blood splatter and that kind of stuff, which honestly is one of the negatives in this film from me. I don't think they needed to do that necessarily. They could have kept it as pure as it would have been in the 80s, but maybe budget, and obviously we talked about the limitations were part of the reason why they did not. There's an actor in the role, in the suit, and they dub in Peter Dinklage's voice when Toxie is talking, which is really cool to keep, like I said, that mild-mannered persona of Winston as the Toxic Avenger. It makes it really funny. But also it's like really cool because it adds that kind of like 80s really bad lip syncing dubbing, and they don't really try to fix it. So, you know, Peter Dinklage will be giving the commentary and the actual actor in the Toxic costume will be talking and the lips will be off with the vocals, and they just leave it. And I think that's brilliant, because that's exactly what they would have done on a shoestring budget in the 80s. There's a lot of great side characters. There's a rock band, like a new metal band in the movie called Killer Nuts. And they actually end up being part of the goon squad for Kevin Bacon and Elijah Wood in the movie and kind of do a lot of their dirty work. They were so funny, so over the top. There's a reveal for one of the members of Killer Nuts in the last like 10 to 15 minutes of the movie when his mask gets taken off. You'll know him when you see him first because he's one of the first prominent like crazy people that we see in the movie or villains. And he's wearing like a chicken head mask, like one of those rubber rooster or chicken heads that you can buy at the Halloween store. And that gets taken off in the last 15 minutes of the movie, and we get the reveal of who that is. I was in literal stitches. I was dying laughing. In summary, as you guys know, I give you my rating of the film in two parts. I give it as the craft of the film, which is basically all the production, all the technical aspects. And then I give you the crux, which is basically everything else. Would come down to basically the performances and kind of how the movie made me feel overall. So in doing that, the craft of the film is going to get a pretty high score for me, if for no other reason because of the hair and makeup that I talked about and the effects, the practical effects. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I absolutely love the callback to the 1980s. The only reason that this doesn't get a higher than an 8 for me is because of that CGI blood that I don't think you needed to do. And then the crux of the film is also going to get an 8 out of 10. If you're somebody that does not like this schlocky, kind of pointless gore fest that we get with some of these movies, then you're going to probably hate this thing, and I would recommend you stay away from it. But if you're a horror fan, and even more specifically, if you're a 1980s horror fan, you got to check this thing out. My overall score on the new Macon Blair, I say new, but Jesus, out for like 3 years, and we're finally getting a chance to see it. The 2025 version, I'll just put it that way, of the Toxic Avenger from Macon Blair is going to get an 8 out of 10 from me. I really, really enjoyed this thing, and I'm actually going to be checking it out in my market on a big screen. I would love to see this thing with a crowd. Oh my God. What did you guys think of the Toxic Avenger? Have you seen it, or are you planning on seeing it? Let me know down below, and are you a fan of this franchise in general? Is this one that you're looking forward to? I would love to know that as well. Thanks for tuning into this movie review, guys. I will see you out here next time in the garage.